I left on a Tuesday because Tuesdays mean nothing. The office plant had yellowed at the edges, much like my days, and when I handed in the badge, it felt like unsnapping a leash no one admitted was there. I posted the laptop, boxed my trophies, then opened every drawer at home and asked a question that started polite and turned surgical. Do you earn your keep, or do I carry you? One by one, the answers piled on the floor. That night, I slept on a mat in a room so bare my breath sounded expensive. Morning arrived with a strange dividend time paid in raw hours. It also brought a bill I hadn't budgeted for. In the quiet, every postponed conversation walked in, sat cross-legged, and asked to be fed. On the second morning, I weighed the bag like a conscience. 10 kilograms felt honest until the straps bit the bones above my shoulders. I told myself pain meant progress because I used to tell myself exhaustion meant success. Old slogans don't die. They change uniforms. The street smelled of bread I couldn't afford and detergent from laundries that bill by the kilo. I passed a shop window crowded with versions of me mannequins in pressed shirts, smiles stapled on. I tried to smile back and felt the staple. When the sun rose fully, the city turned blunt and bright. Freedom gleamed like a new knife. I learned to tuck it safely, or it would cut everything, including the hands that carried it. Selling was easy until the souvenirs spoke, the teak box my father bargained for in a humid bazaar. The mug Mira gave me after a storm we shot together, the lamp shaped like a question mark. Each thing tugged a thread tied to a person. I told myself I was keeping the people and letting the things go, but my hands didn't believe me. I made rules, no duplicates, no just in case, no buying containers for the life I didn't need. By noon, the room was an archive of decisions. I ate rice with salt and felt brave. Then I checked my balance and felt small. Courage and cash rarely arrive on the same day. Or was same store. By evening, I discovered hunger has a ticking sound. It keeps time with the radiator and the neighbor's television. I took the stairs to feel the burn and not the worry. On the landing, I met a flyer that promised storage solutions for every lifestyle, and laughed until the echo laughed back. Outside, the air grew metallic. I walked longer to spend less, and learned another equation: distance times emptiness equals clarity. In a shop window, a watch gleamed like a halo on a wrist I no longer wore. I checked the time on a cracked phone and counted the hours I had bought. They were more expensive than any watch. That first week, I learned the room remembers the life it held. Pale rectangles ghosted where shelves used to be. The outlet by the bed blinked its two small eyes, confused. I made tea in a metal cup and sat on the floor like a student of my own life. Freedom felt heavier at night. It asked for receipts. What did I buy it with? I listed hidden payments, attention I had wasted, favors I owed, the planet's patience, my mother's unvisited Sundays. I promised the room I would earn the echo. The steam rose, then disappeared, then returned as a watermark on the window. Nothing leaves. It changes state and asks new questions. The second week taught me the price of weather. Rain turned the city into a ledger that smudged as soon as I wrote in it. My shoes leaked like a bad habit. I walked anyway because buses eat coins, and coins now measured meals. I learned the discipline of pockets. One held cash, one held receipts, one kept a folded map of places with free refills of tap water. Hunger arrived as a narrator that explained everything, including why bright billboards feel personal. I started counting weight and excuses. The umbrella I did not own was an argument I had with the sky. I watched office towers glow and realized electricity makes a room forget it. It is night. In the dim stairwells where I waited out downpours, I discovered a calmer clock. Time passed at the speed of drips. If I stayed still long enough, the fear that I had made a mistake softened, then pulled at my feet and joined the rest of the rain. A split seam sent me to the cobbler under the flyover, a shop stitched together with twine, glue, and patience. Hassan looked at my shoe like a doctor regarding a patient who insists on jogging mid-fever. He asked why I needed a bag so small and a life to match. I said I wanted freedom. He nodded the way elders nod when a younger man mistakes a word for the whole story. He showed me the places that crack first. "Stitch here," he said, "because that is where your foot asks more than the leather planned." He charged little, then taught more. "Keep the shoes dry with newspaper, not heat. Walk the edges when the pavement is a river." He worked without hurry, and his hands told me about years I could not see. I left with mended seams, and the feeling that repair is a quiet kind of wealth. The cafe with the quiet tables became my office without payroll. I traded small edits on menus and a logo refresh for black coffee and bread that stayed warm longer than my fingers. Lena watched me work and asked for the story in one sentence. I told her I was trying to live with almost nothing. She refilled my cup and said, "Almost is the most expensive word." She showed me her books, lines of debt and recovery, and the way sugar prices punish optimism. We agreed on a barter that kept us both honest. I cleaned the chalkboard and rewired a lamp while she taught me the rhythm of opening at dawn. My days grew measured by ovens, a grinder, a till, and the doorbell that sings when someone enters. Freedom tasted like coffee that is not free but is fairly earned. I learned to measure need by what I could lift for 10 blocks. A market stall sold soap in unwrapped bars, mustard yellow and honest. The vendor weighed them on a scale that had seen uprisings and weddings. We traded small. I corrected a sign. He discounted a sliver. I carried the cent in my pocket. When you have little, each object is either a nuisance or a colleague. I watched a woman barter thread for lemons and felt the city's original circuitry wake. No receipts, just names and nods. A boy hawked umbrellas that would not survive a gust, and I wanted to buy one for its hope. Instead, I learned the way to hold a hood so rain runs off the back. The market taught me that minimalism is not absence. It is a map of relationships that carry weight together. Nights grew colder and the room learned my breath. I cooked rice and lentils on a single burner stove and tasted how patience seasons food. The flame sounded like a small animal, steady and brave. I ate slowly to make the meal reach more minutes. After, I washed the pot with the soap I had bartered for and set it to dry on the windowsill that looks at a brick wall. The wall glowed with a neighbor's television, a silent collage of lives with bigger couches. I made a new budget that counted favors to return and skills to offer. In a notebook, I wrote the names of those who had made my lightness possible. Hassan with his thread, Lena with her refills, the city with its tap water. Freedom is not a solo sport, it is a relay. And tonight, I carried the baton as carefully as I carried the pot to the rack. The third week arrived with a tremor I pretended was excitement. I had eaten less to make the math kinder and walked farther to keep the ledger clean. Halfway across a sun-struck bridge, the world tilted as if the river had leaned up to read me. I sat, because the railing was the only sentence that made sense. A cyclist asked if I was fine, and I answered like an invoice almost. My hands shook hard enough to turn coins into bells. I counted breaths the way I used to count notifications. A vendor pushed a cart of cut mango, and the smell lifted a memory of childhood summers when my mother salted slices and told stories that ended with everyone fed. I bought a cup and felt the sugar hit my blood like a small choir. The tremor softened into a lesson I could not unfail. The body keeps a separate budget, and it collects on time. The clinic smelled like cotton and apology. I told the nurse I had a small situation, and she told me my blood pressure had a larger opinion. While I waited for lab slips, I studied the bulletin board of ailments that prefer the poor and the proud. I had traded furniture for time, and now traded pride for care. A young doctor asked about diet, sleep, and stress, and I realized minimalism had trimmed my answers until they sounded like slogans. He spoke gently about fuel, and warned me that freedom without maintenance becomes a breakdown. I paid in cash, not much, but the receipt weighed more than my bag. On the way out, I promised my body increments more water, real meals, rest that counts. The city outside roared like a stadium that did not know who had won. I decided to treat survival as a craft, not a stunt. Mira found me outside the cafe, sketching a poster for next week's open mic. She had been away shooting storms and came back with eyes that had measured other kinds of damage. She listened to my clinic story and cut through the bravado with a photographer's patience. She said freedom that requires you to disappear is just another uniform. I told her I was learning to live on less. She asked if I was also learning to ask for more from the right places. We walked to the river where the wind combed the surface into fine lines. She framed me with her hands and said the story works until the first body falls, especially if it is yours. I wanted to argue, but the bridge tremor lived fresh in my bones. We agreed to eat properly before we debated philosophy. She bought noodles. I accepted. It tasted like truce. We tested my story in the field. Mira asked to follow me for a day. No hero shots, just the arithmetic. I agreed, because truth sounds generous until it asks for proof. We rode buses I usually avoid, counted the coins, timed the walks between free water and clean bathrooms, and mapped the places where security guards smile until you sit too long. She photographed my hands more than my face. She said they told the part of the story where work still happens. At the market, Hassan laughed at the camera, and then straightened like a man facing a mirror he respects. Lena sent us out with day-old bread and fresh questions. When the sun dropped, my steps shortened and Mira lowered the lens. She said the picture I wanted was lighter than the life I had. We both nodded. Honesty weighed more, and it fit better. That night, the room felt less like a temple, and more like a studio where drafts are allowed. I cooked a fuller meal and ate without bargaining each bite against tomorrow. I listed costs that never show up on price tags: the friend who checks on you, the clerk who looks the other way when you refill a bottle, the mother who pretends not to worry. Mira texted a photo of my hands tying a bag with a neat square knot. She wrote, "This is the real poster." I understood then that minimalism without community is costume. The kit matters, but the chorus carries the song. I rolled my mat, drank water, set an alarm I would respect, and felt the floor accept my weight. Freedom had not shrunk. It had grown teeth and a spine. It asked me to tear, and in that ask, I heard a future I could actually pay for. The week began with a list titled Costs We Do Not See. I started with trash because it multiplies when you are not looking. In the cafe's alley, I met the morning's aftermath. Cups, pastry paper, a glitter of sugar that ants would turn into an empire. Lena said the bin fee had climbed again. She paid it so others could pretend the leaving was magic. I wiped the stainless hauled bags and felt the tug in my forearms like an unpaid bill. Hassan waved as I passed his stall and pointed to his own sweet pile. Leather curls soft as onion skins. He said, "Someone carries what we throw away." I thought of my former life where the cleaner arrived at sunrise and the kitchen reset like a stage. Minimalism had taken away my props, but not the labor hidden in the wings. I counted the minutes and named each one for a task. When the alley finally smelled like rain and coffee again, I understood that freedom is not lighter. It is honest about weight and where it travels. I started timing tasks with the stubbornness I used to save for design sprints. 10 minutes to scrub the espresso heads. 4 to restock cups. 16 to walk to the wholesaler and back with sugar that used to live in a storage room I now could not afford. The ledger grew honest. Every minute I bought with simplicity arrived bearing another minute elsewhere that someone had already paid. Mira visited between assignments and watched me stack saucers into clean towers. She said the shot list for our lives often hides the crew. I wrote crew on my palm and added names. Hassan for souls, Lena for light, earfin for what disappears. Answer what disappears. I thought of my mother, who made time by waking before the house and knitting it into breakfast. The days stretched and thinned. My closing, my pausing, my pocket notebook had fewer blank squares. Time is not a thing you own. It is a neighborhood you help maintain. At noon, temptation tried a softer voice, and had found me on a borrowed Wi-Fi signal, its algorithm kind as a friend who knows your size. A roll-top backpack promised to redistribute weight with science to carry the life I had edited into a single elegant cylinder. The price matched a week of meals. My thumb hovered. Freedom likes new tools the way athletes like shoes, and I am not immune to upgrades that whisper of absolution. I walked to the store to try it without buying. The fabric felt like an argument well made. Mira arrived mid-test and caught my reflection primed to agree. She asked if the bag would carry the questions or only the gear. I laughed and felt the salesman deflate at the edge of hearing. I returned the borrowed weight to the display and paid my craving by admitting it. On the street, my old pack rode light again, the way a scar feels when you stop picking it. Hassan called me to pick up a small job, stitching a strap on a delivery rider's bag while he managed customers. I learned that steadiness is a skill you rent from your breath. The needle wanted to wander. The wax thread asked for heat from fingers. Hassan told me to listen for the click when the stitch sits. He said the bag had carried 10,000 lunches and would carry 10,000 more if we respected the edge. The rider arrived sweating, helmet hair pointing in many directions, eyes soft with fatigue. He thanked us and ran. I pictured the time he carries for others, stacked in boxes and tied with rubber bands, all those minutes the city eats without chewing. When I returned the all to its cup, Hassan grinned and said, I had earned tea. I drank it slowly, feeling the seam hold in my hands like a line in a poem that finally lands. By night, I tallied what the day had asked and what it returned. The list read like a prayer where every line begins with thank you and ends with still learning. I cleaned my pot and repaired a fraying cuff with the same thread Hassan had given me. The radio whispered news of people counting larger losses, and my room held the sound with care. I checked the budget and saw a narrow path that did not frighten me. It would demand more walking, more trading, more attention to water and rest. It would also demand I keep asking who carries the remainder when I claim I travel light. I added a final rule to my notebook. Do not let simplicity turn you away from service. I set the pencil down, turned off the lamp, and lay on the mat. The darkness felt earned, not empty. The quiet had a pulse I could name. It beat like a stitch holding. The bus pulled into the neighborhood where trees lean like aunties who know your secrets. Paint flaked from gates I used to rattle after school. My mother's balcony plants had multiplied into a jungled curtain. She opened the door before I knocked because sons carry footsteps that never change. Jaya's sari pleats were perfect, her eyes a ledger that loves you and still asks for figures. She held my face as if it might roll off the table. I unpacked my 10 kilograms and placed them on the bed where exam sheets once sprawled. She sat, smoothed the sheet, and asked what I was saving. I said time. She repeated the word as if testing a spice, then showed me her hands. Chalk dust had long left, but the tendons told the hours. We brewed tea, and the kettle sang the same note as years ago. In the steam, I saw the bill for my freedom growing item by item. Rooms remember who bought the quiet. Mothers always keep the receipts. And true, mothers always keep the receipts. In the kitchen, I resumed an apprenticeship older than my wages. Jaya measured tea by listening, not counting. 2 spoons for talk, 1 for silence. Cardamom when pride needs softening. She asked what I had eaten, and the story flinched. I told her about rice and lentils and a tremor on a bridge. She salted my plate the way she used to salt mango, precise and parental. She said hunger hides inside ideas if you let it. I tried to explain the arithmetic of minutes and money, and how a smaller life can hold a larger attention. She rinsed cups and said attention is only generous when it returns with something cooked. We laughed because she was right, and because laughter keeps the flame steady on low. She sent me to the market list taped to the fridge. Sugar, soap, onions, a bulb for the dead tube light. I photographed it like a contract and felt the old rhythm of errands come back like a song I knew by heart. My childhood room had shrunk to fit the truth. The trophies I once boxed felt loud in the silence. J.A. opened a cupboard and drew out a folder that held receipts like brittle feathers. Fees, forms, bus passes, repair slips for shoes I ran through, a letter from a principal who wrote about potential as if it were collateral. She did not accuse. She narrated the math of care. I realized what my minimalism had subtracted was furniture, not history. I said I wanted to carry my share now. She cocked her head and asked if I understood the interest on delayed gratitude. We smiled, then did the work. We sorted papers, kept what mattered, let go of what only repeated the story. At the bottom lay a photo of me holding a science fair medal with a face that believed in clean beginnings. I tucked it into my pocket. Clean is earned, not bought. Beginnings require a sweep of the floor. We ran errands together and the city revealed invoices I used to ignore. At the electricity office, fans pushed warm air while people fanned themselves with folded bills. Jaya greeted the clerk by name, and I watched respect function like a small backstage key. At the grocer, she selected onions by sound, thumbing the skins and listening for a dry crack. She taught me how to carry heavy bags without hurting wrists, a lesson in leverage disguised as care. We replaced the dead tube light, and the room brightened with an honesty that fluorescent lights refused to hide. I climbed a wobbly chair and tightened the rattling fan. The screws squealed like stubborn thoughts. Jaya brewed evening tea and said the house is a chorus, and someone must keep the rhythm. I realized my freedom had been offbeat. I tuned myself with a screwdriver and a receipt book. In the new light, the room looked like a truth you could study for hours. Night rose over the roof where we used to dry bed sheets into sails. The neighborhood hummed with pressure cookers and television theme songs. Jaya wrapped a shawl and asked me what I would keep now. Not in a bag, but in a life. I said I would keep a kit small enough to carry and a circle big enough to matter. I would keep meals that do not apologize, work that fixes what breaks, rest that counts, and a budget that includes other people. She nodded, satisfied as a teacher who sees a student show work, not just answers. We shared guavas with salt, the kind of dessert that makes sense to the body first. I promised to visit weekly and to send for bills even when I was not here to stand in line. She kissed my forehead and told me to sleep. The roof breeze felt like a receipt, stamped paid in part. The rest would be earned tomorrow, which is the only honest way. I woke before the light and packed a kit that did not try to impress. Thread, tape, a screwdriver, a cloth bag for tools, a spare charger, a roll of gaffer, a folded map with circles around places that need hands. The room watched me work and approved. I had mistaken purity for purpose, and now purpose made a better list. I walked to the cafe and arrived before the oven's side. Lena rubbed sleep from her eyes and asked what I was building. A neighborhood, I said, small enough to hold, big enough to feed. She laughed and handed me keys to a cabinet that had become a graveyard of once useful things. We tested each item and orphaned nothing that could still serve. The lid that fit a pot found a pot. The cable that fit a machine woke it. By the time the first customers entered, the place ran with a quiet that came from many pieces knowing their jobs. Minimalism had loosened into stewardship. It felt like a craft with a pulse. By noon, I carried the kit to Hassan, who greeted me like a man meeting a familiar season. He asked what problem I had brought, and I said several small ones that belonged to everyone. He approved of the humility and set me to work on a chair that wobbled where his customers waited. We tightened, shimmed, sanded, and the chair learned how to stand again. Hassan told me repair begins by believing the object remembers its best shape. I asked him if people did too. He said sometimes, but they need witnesses. We split tea and counted the ways a city could become a workshop if you showed it the tools. A delivery rider stopped and tried the chair and left a blessing in the shape of a grateful grin. I wrote down what we had used and what it cost. The list surprised me with how little it took. A wedge of wood, 12 minutes, 2 pairs of hands. The ledger of enough grew legible. Mira met me at the river steps with a camera and a question I had begun to earn. What does your freedom serve today? I showed her the map with circles and told her we would start with water. The public tap had a broken handle that turned drink into struggle. We flagged the custodian, offered parts from the kit that matched well enough, and borrowed a wrench for what ours could not do. Mira photographed bolts and hands in a choreography that made the fix look like a dance instead of a task. She said the camera should not flatter labor, only see it. When the tap turned smoothly, a line formed as if the city had been watching from behind a curtain. We stepped aside and Mira lowered her lens. The sound of water on steel sang through the concrete. I felt a hush enter my chest, the kind that arrives when a principle becomes a pipe that works. We packed the kit. The map looked smaller. In the evening, Lena hosted a bring one, fix one hour. The cafe filled with objects carrying stories and minor injuries. A lamp that flickered because of a jealous wire. A backpack whose zipper sulked. A stool that preferred to be a question. People arrived wary and left brighter, their items mended and their names learned. I moved from table to table like a stagehand who knew the cues. Mira floated with her camera and asked for consent, then captured hands, teaching hands. Hassan dropped by with spare needles and stayed to show a teenager how to stitch without swearing. We set a jar by the register labeled Community Kit, and it collected coins, a Metro card with credit, and a note that said thank you for not making me buy new. When we closed, the room glowed with a light that did not come from bulbs. It came from a kind of wealth that receipts cannot tally. That night I counted what I owned and realized the more accurate verb was tend. The list fit on a page, but it extended into other hands. My bag had become a commons on straps. My room a staging area. My hours, a budget shared with those who had lifted me when I was lighter than wise. I wrote new rules that did not punish and did not brag. Carry what you can teach, keep what you can repair. Borrow like a neighbor. Return with interest. Rest as if tomorrow needs you. I placed the kit by the door, texted Mira the next circle on the map, and set an alarm that would start with stretches instead of scrolling. The floor felt steady, the air clean, the night content to be ordinary. Freedom no longer asked me to disappear. It asked me to show up with a small bag and a larger willingness. The cost felt fair. The work felt like a way home. Morning arrived with work already humming, and for once I didn't sprint to catch it. The kit waited by the door like a friend who knows my pace. I had rewritten my terms: fewer boasts, more maintenance, fewer purchases, more practice. Freedom was no longer a cliff I leapt from. It was a path I swept daily so others would not trip. I visited the market and paid with names before I paid with cash. Rafi saved me the good soap ends. Zahid waved from his bike and took the lane like a promise. At the cafe, Lena's ledger wore fewer frowns. We stocked the jar that said Community Kit and watched it fill with coins and notes folded like secrets that had learned to speak. I messaged my mother the week's bills and she texted back a thumbs up and a recipe that braised time into flavor. By noon, I realized the room inside me had windows again. The light was ordinary, and that was the magic. It showed the dust I could wipe and the faces I could thank. Mira proposed we show the story without selling it. A small exhibit at the cafe, prints pinned with binder clips, captions that read like receipts, minutes, hands, names, costs. She would refuse the hero shot and keep the seam frame. I wrote notes that sounded like instructions for a future me: keep the door soft on its hinges, sharpen the pencil before the budget, eat first, argue after. Hassan arrived with a shoe whose sole had given up in the rain, and together we stitched it publicly like a slow demonstration that repair can be an event worth watching. People gathered, not to clap, but to learn which knot holds. I spoke less and tightened more. When the crowd thinned, Mira asked if I could live like this without turning it into content. I said the camera could rest when the hands already knew the step. She lowered her lens and nodded, like someone who trusts a rhythm she helped reveal. The call came from home just after sunset. The tube light flickered again and the fan had learned a new rattle. Jaya sounded cheerful, which meant the problem was small enough to share. I packed the kit and took the bus that still smells like dust and old coins. In the kitchen, we worked like a duo who had toured together for years. She brewed tea while I swapped the starter, tightened the bracket, cleaned the contacts, and set the fan back into a circle that sang. She told me the neighbor's son needed a portfolio reviewed, and I realized the kit could include attention as a legitimate tool. We ate dough that had waited patiently for us to be ready. When I left, the stairwell light worked on the first try. Outside, the night had the texture of clean paper. My bag felt the same weight as when I arrived. But inside, something had been added that did not count in kilograms. It counted in continuity. On Sunday, we tested a rule I had written in the margins: keep a small kit. Build a larger circle. We mapped a 2-hour walk, the Gat Tap, Hassan's stall, the market, the park where lamps short in the rain. People met us with objects and questions. A stroller with a cranky wheel, a guitar strap that failed mid-song, a zipper that staged a tiny mutiny. We did what we could and wrote what needed a specialist. I learned to say I don't know like a handle offered to a heavier box. The jar at the cafe covered costs for parts, and when it didn't, someone else did. By dusk, our map of errands looked like a web instead of a line. Mira took a final frame of the kit on a park bench, scuffed and content. Then put the camera away. We sat without talking and listened to the city count itself. It sounded less like demand and more like invitation. At night, I returned to the room that started all this by refusing to lie for me. It looked the same: a mat, a lamp, a window that understood my breath. The difference lived in the ledger I had stopped hiding. I wrote tomorrow's list: water first, food that reaches the afternoon, a visit to the clinic bulletin board to post a notice for the next repair hour, a reminder to call my mother about the neighbor's portfolio, an envelope labeled Hassan for blades and needles, another for Lena for flour. I added a final line: I had earned the right to believe freedom. Paid forward becomes belonging. I rolled the mat and felt the floor approve. The city murmured like a workshop resting. My bag leaned against the wall, the smallest it had ever been, and the richest. I turned off the lamp. The dark arrived not as absence but as trust. I slept with a receipt pinned to my chest that read in bold, "Do tomorrow show up?"